As the state of California responds to and fights back against the blatant political power grab in Texas with its own redistricting effort, that state's Governor Gavin Newsom is fighting for a different kind of power in today's political landscape. Attention. Newsom's press office for the past week and a half has been flooding the zone by flooding social media posts with posts that mimic Donald Trump's style and doing what no Democrat has tried for the last 9 years in dealing with Donald Trump, beating Donald Trump at his own game. Since Donald Trump posted a fake Time magazine cover of himself as king, Gavin Newsom's team did the same thing. In one post, Gavin Newsom calls MAGA Republicans, quote, snowflakes in all caps. In another, he says this, quote, Donald is finished. He is no longer hot. First the hands, so tiny, and now me. Gavin C. Newsom have taken away his step. Many are saying he can't even do the big stairs on Air Force One anymore. Uses the little baby stairs now. Sad. Referring to a picture of Donald Trump alongside Vladimir Putin. He just wrote, vaxxed. And Newsom has already captured the visual style of the quintessential Trump post. There's the retweet of buff Gavin Newsom holding an American flag. Or maybe the real winner, a portrait of himself surrounded by Kid Rock, Tucker Carlson, and Hulk Hogan. Newsom's social media campaign is clearly getting under the skin of many on the right.
I don't know what he's trying to do, but it comes across as childish. And you're the governor of the biggest state in the union. What are you doing?
This is a sitting governor. You know, those are Congress people. And it feels like we're watching a summer camp skit. We're watching slam poetry. We're watching these attention seekers that are just so wrapped up in clickbait, and they are supposed to be governing.
Hypocrisy is dying a sad and tragic death right now. Say the anchors from the network that paid $800 million for their lies. Now, if the hypocrisy in all of this isn't clear enough, if it doesn't smack you on the side of the head, here's what podcaster and radio host Charlemagne the God had to say about Fox News' reaction there.
Have you ever told the 45th and 47th President of the United States of America to stop? Have you ever told the 45th and 47th President of the United States of America that they need to be more serious, to act like it's cool when Trump do it, but it's a problem when Gavin does it? Knock it off.
It's good for the goose. You know how that goes. Joining our coverage, Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. Matt and Alex are still here as well. Congressman, what do you think about this double standard from Fox, and what do you think about what Governor Newsom is doing?
I freaking love what Governor Newsom is doing, because that's what offense looks like, and we don't see enough Democrats, frankly, doing that. We have to be in more spaces, more places. And always on to voters means always honest. And Donald Trump, for all of his warts and all of his corruption and incompetency, he's always on. And so when he makes a mistake, he is on an hour later, 2 hours later, 3 hours later, and it diminishes how the public views him. If we were always on with our ideas and our values, it will project authenticity and who we really are. And so you're seeing Governor Newsom, I think, most effectively do that. And I also like, Nicole, that he's on offense. You have to either put Donald Trump on his heels, or he's going to put the most vulnerable in our community on theirs. And that's what this move is. And more Democrats, particularly governors, should model this and step up.
I agree with you. I have to ask you this, though. Like, how did it take 9 years to decide to simply try, like, mocking him? I mean, South Park figured it out. Gavin Newsom figured it out. But it's still a trickle compared to the fire hose from the other side.
It's our strength and our weakness that we, stand on virtue and fight many of these fights with one hand tied behind our back. And often it's the upper hand. And I'm tired of being told, when they go low, we go high. I mean, the way I see it, when they go low, we should bury their ideas below the Capitol. That's the only way we're going to protect the most vulnerable. Governor Newsom gets that. And yes, we can talk about, and there's great points to be made about how long it's taken us, but he's meeting the moment now. And it's just a matter of, do others join him as he does? Alex,
the piece of this that is likely to trigger Trump the most is that it's funny and that it's sticky and that it'll get attention and that even his favorite network anchors at his favorite network are talking about it over on Fox News. Your thoughts?
I mean, talk about snowflakes. Talk about owning the libs. I mean, it is amazing that a party founded largely in service of melting the snowflakes is melting so quickly when one person actually lays manages to land one on Trump, and that would be Gavin Newsom. I mean, I will just say for the record, I have never wanted a piece of campaign merch as badly as I want that laying of the hands on Newsom with Hulk Hogan and Tucker Carlson and Kid Rock. I think he's having a great time doing this, Nicole. And I think, not only is it time to sort of rethink the notion of self-serious liberalism, and I'm not going to malign Democrats for being serious about it because we're talking about very, very grave issues and very, very real consequences for a number of people, right? That's serious stuff. But the message is delivered through a joyful warrior. And I think that's really important. Humor, as you point out, is Trump's kryptonite. Cultural currency is what I think has made the manosphere so popular, so prevalent, so much of a powerful sort of voting bloc, if you will, because it was rooted in culture. And this is going viral and being memeable is part of a necessary strategy to succeed in being rooted in culture. So I think what Newsom is doing is broadly in service of Democratic goals. The other thing I'll say is Trump has rendered so many important concepts meaningless by taking what is really legitimate criticism about his corruption and his authoritarian tendencies and throwing it back at his critics, right? And that's changed the way Democrats can even describe what's happening to us as a country. This is an opportunity for Democrats to take back one of Trump's biggest and maybe only selling points, which is his unvarnished real talk. The fact that a Democrat can successfully mimic that really takes that arrow out of Trump's quiver. I think in the last couple of days, Trump has ceased tweeting in all caps. That is indicative of a man who, upon self-reflection, is like, oh, maybe this doesn't have the same resonance as it used to. And that, to me, is really telling about what a winning strategy this is on the part of the California governor.
Joining us now, Vice President of Mercury Public Affairs and former White House Deputy Director of Platforms, Megan Coyne. She's also served as the social media director for New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy's office. Also with us, Democratic strategist and MSNBC political analyst Basil Smikle, staff writer for The Atlantic and author of its newsletter Galaxy Brain, Charlie Wartzel, and Politico's senior national politics correspondent Adam Wren. Everybody, thank you for joining us. All right, Basil, I'm going to begin with you on this. What do you think?
You're right. It's provocative, it's ostentatious, and it meets the moment. I think if you're looking for something for him to do that is intellectually stimulating, that's great. But what's better is that there's an emotional reaction, even if it's just a laugh, even if it's like that, that's crazy because it got you to do something and react to politics in a way that you may not have done before. And it is true that it does hold up a mirror to what's happening on the right, because if you're saying to yourself, why the heck would he do that, Donald Trump? Why would he post that? Why would he do this? To be able to turn it back around and say, well, do you see how ridiculous this is? This is our politics today. Now, you're right. It is a campaign strategy. I don't know that this works a year from now. But for this moment, given all of the heavy stuff that we're dealing with, it does seem to be breaking through.
Adam, give me a little bit more of the background.
Yeah, so what's interesting, Katie, is that this actually came from former Governor Jerry Brown's own social media account, and the Newsom people took it over. And, Newsom has been studying MAGA media, whether it's reading Breitbart or watching One America News for years now, and really sort of reverse engineered the AI, slop that goes to the top of the X algorithm. This is Elon Musk's social media company, and the For You tab essentially prizes this kind of AI slop, these memes that we're seeing. And Newsom Newsom figured that out, and he's got a team of about 4 or 5 people who work on this for him. He sort of leads the effort, and they've seen a massive, inundation of followers, about 30 to 50,000 new followers a day since August 1st. And, what's interesting is he actually can't take this account with him. So if he runs for president in 2028, he loses it on January 4th of 2027. And so it's fascinating to kind of see him really game the algorithm, figure out how to talk to both Republicans and Democrats in a way no other 2028 Democrat has.
Megyn, you got a lot of attention for Phil Murphy's social media feed. I think the Times did a profile on you a few years back. What do you think, as somebody who has been in charge of this very arena before?
I think that Governor Newsom is absolutely showing us all a masterclass right now in how government social media should be functioning. It's funny, it's quick, it's culturally relevant, it's cutting through the noise, and it's landing. And it's sort of a win-win because it's energizing Democrats while really frustrating Republicans. They're sort of not sure how to react to someone meeting them where they are and copying their playbook. And Democrats really aren't used to someone standing up, calling Republicans out constantly and landing punch after punch after punch without flinching. And that's exactly what Governor Newsom's doing right now, and that's why it's just so exciting to see.
So, Charlie, he's gaining followers, obviously. We're seeing, as Adam pointed out, just a daily count of followers that's going up and up. It's obviously getting a lot of attention. It's on this show, they're talking about it on Fox. It's everywhere, at least today. How is it playing online, though? Beyond the extra follower count, what's the reaction online?
I think it's really just cheap attention, right? I feel like this isn't really. There is a strategy here, which is to, sort of parrot back this and make the people on Fox News look ridiculous and essentially get attention. But in terms of like a political strategy, it feels kind of thin, right? It feels very, again, Trump's whole social media presence, his whole presidency, his whole self is very, ego-driven, egocentric, kind of, ridiculous. And this is just kind of aping that, right? This is done by somebody who clearly very much wants to be president. He very much wants the attention. And it has this kind of, cathartic bit to it. But a lot of people that I have seen online are also like, this is very, look at me, right? This isn't organizing. This isn't, really putting forth a message. This is just kind of, pointing and criticizing, and that's fine. But I think when you compare it to, another person whose social media strategy has been really in the conversation lately is Zohran Mamdani in New York in the mayoral race. And that social media strategy is different. It situates him in the city among the people he's trying to govern. And I think that there's a real comparison here. I think it's kind of thin, honestly.
I think that's something to talk about. I think you're right about that, because Donald Trump, I'm sure we were arguing about how thin this was back in 2015, 2016, or how ridiculous or how absurd or how unelectable or childish he seemed. But it was all also a part of who Donald Trump is. It was authentically him. He is this person that you see online. He is self-obsessed. He does talk very brashly. He is offensive, fly by his seat, reactionary. Gavin Newsom is not Donald Trump.
Right.
I mean, Gavin Newsom would probably say and happily say he is not Donald Trump. Zohran Mamdani is being his authentic self online, which is working for him. So is there a risk here? Gavin Newsom, it's funny, it's trolling.
Well, it's not a long-term strategy. I think, to your point, you used the term, I think it was culturally relevant.
Yeah.
It is in this moment, but it's not a long-term strategy to get your message out. I mean, I think it's just a moment where, in the midst of everything that we're dealing with, he's breaking through because we're talking about him. And that's important now. Now, can that be sustained? I don't know.
Press is bad press?
Yes. And I mean, if the point is, Adam's point, it's look at me. Well, that is a lot of what politics is. It's look at me. Give me that moment, and then let me take you from here to there.
So how do you transition, Megyn? Because, I mean, as Adam pointed out, he can't carry over this account. He's going to have to start again if he has a campaign, launches his campaign next year.
Yeah, you typically don't. You transition over to the next governor. The followers transition over. The content gets wiped. I think that Governor Newsom has built up his brand enough that losing this account won't be a huge setback. Since his name is getting out there, I imagine that this is translating over to his personal political account that he gets to keep with him. It's not like he's going to lose everything when he no longer has this account.
Yeah, but how do you use that, the strategy that he's employing of this, making fun of Donald Trump, the trolling of Donald Trump, and also anybody who tries to come after him? He's been trolling Fox News, Dana Perino, he's been trolling Kid Rock. I mean, anybody who tries to come after him, he posts back just in the same way that Donald Trump does. How do you take that, though, and then say, this is satire, this is me trying to show you how ridiculous this is, but now listen to me be serious. Now listen to my policy.
Yeah, there's absolutely a way for him to do that. I think we saw this last week when he held his press conference on redistricting. He's moving forward with it. He's not all talk and not following it up with any action. And I'm sure that they'll continue to balance that, and it helps draw people in. So he is doing all of these crazy, ridiculous, fun things. It draws people in, and then they're going to see more of the serious from him. He's a very accomplished governor, so people are going to be seeing a lot more of that in their feeds.
So the people that are maybe seeing it, Adam, are they going to be beyond the Democrats? Is it going to be the folks the Democrats need? The Times had a great takeout today showing that voter registration for Democrats, and Basil, I'll get you on this, is plummeting. I mean, they're just hemorrhaging voters every single year. New registration for new voters. They're not coming out as Democratic. They're not ticking the Democratic box. So is this reaching those folks?
Yeah, what's interesting is I talked to a New Hampshire Democrat, Jim Demers, whose job it is with Stand Up New Hampshire to sort of bring some of these 2028 candidates to this early primary state. And he told me that in the context of redistricting, Newsom is really breaking through to Democratic primary voters there. They see him as a counterweight to Donald Trump. They see him as a Democrat who is fighting Trump. And this X account, I think, is of a piece with that. It's framing him as someone who is taking Trump head on. Two people in the arena. The White House is officially responding to it with their own memes. And so I think it's breaking through beyond just people who are super online. And, real early state primary voters are hearing of what Newsom's doing around redistricting. They like it. And the X account sort of dovetails with that in a way that does break through.
Basil?
No, I think that's right. And look, there were two things that I heard earlier in my career that I apply to this moment, and that question about where Democrats are in the registration. One, that every movement becomes an institution. And two, this is from my former Congressmember Charlie Rangel, who said that Harlem is not just a place, it's a state of mind. And I think that's where we are with the Democrats today. Number one, I think voters want someone to fight for them. It's not just it's not a brand in the way that it used to be. But they want to find something to be a part of and to connect to. And I think Gavin Newsom is doing a little bit of that. It
used to be the Democrats were the cool set, for a long time. No, seriously.
That's right.
You were a celebrity, you wanted to be a Democrat. Obama certainly made it cool. But even during the Bush years, there was a certain cachet you got with being a Democrat. But it seems to have been lost entirely over the past 5-10 years.
Plus, voters want somebody to fight for them, number one, and that's critical. But the movement to institution part is also critical because I got involved because I saw Jesse Jackson fighting, saying that the party doesn't represent people like him, that meant the people that look like me. And at some point, some of those folks got comfortable. And I think people saw that. They saw the party transition, and maybe the younger voter felt that there were too many people who felt too complacent to really fight for them. And that's an important thing that, as a party leader, you're going to have to contend with it.
All right. Everyone, besides Adam, you're sticking around. Adam, thank you so much for joining us at the top of the show today. I appreciate it. We hope to have you back.
We have an eye on what's happening in Texas and a bit of a fact check for all the people who said concerns about democracy or authoritarianism in last year's campaign against Donald Trump were overblown. Quite the opposite. Indeed, you don't have to take anybody's word for it. You can see it happening out of Trump's own mouth and in the action on the ground in Texas. You can also look to the vocal backlash to what many people view as an effort out in the open, starting far earlier than some of Trump's last efforts when he was in the first term, which were closer to the election. Now, we are a long ways away from the midterms, let alone another presidential. And yet, it's happening and earlier. And people are against it because democracy remains pretty popular. From town hall protests to Vice President Vance and Defense Secretary Hegseth, now getting an earful today in Washington. There are a range of concerns, and we can't always interpret boos exactly by their intent, but democracy is one of the big issues. Texas Democrats are also trying to stand up against something that most modern Republicans would have criticized any time before the MAGA era, and that they certainly still are suing to stop when it happens to them in California. But this is what Republicans are doing: a blatant power grab in an off-year, unusual time to carry out what Trump demanded, to change the rules in the middle of the game to try to get more seats because they are worried about losing a free and fair election in these upcoming midterms. So California Democrats are saying it's time or past time to fight fire with fire. If Republicans are able to strong-arm these tactics in Texas, California Dems, led by Governor Newsom, say they will cancel it right out using their powers in real time. No more long-winded speeches about precedent and declining republic. They are going to do what they say they need to do to blunt what looks like a very abusive, precedent-breaking effort to redraw and kind of basically steal some of these districts in Texas. So that's one way to go at this. Trump, meanwhile, has been very blunt. He thinks that what he's doing is working. He's been censoring and attacking free speech. He's been threatening. We know all that. He's got a Justice Department that's going after some of his political opponents. And he's made false claims that are blatant. He's going after mail-in voting. And then he's been doing an old Trump style of laundering and raising things and then saying, oh, he's only joking. Russia, if you're listening. And then his aides say it was a joke. That was the very first campaign. We're way past all of that. And so joking, or maybe not, about canceling elections in wartime as he meets with a wartime leader, or toying with the idea of an illegal, unconstitutional third term, something that the Supreme Court and courts have never allowed, so he wouldn't even usually be able to get on the ballot. And yet, amidst these other campaigns I'm telling you about, he continues to muse about doing something that is flatly banned under our Constitution.
You know, Vladimir Putin said something, one of the most interesting things. He said your election was rigged because you have mail-in voting. So you mean if we happen to be in a war with somebody, no more elections? Oh, that's good. I wonder what the fake news
like this idea?
Yeah.
No.
Speaking of, we got a long time to go. We have a long time. You know, we have almost 4 years to go, and that's a long time. But despite that, so many people are saying you've got to run again.
Who's saying that? Why is he doing that? Is it to move the goalposts and then act like it's a compromise if he doesn't run for a third term and make other ongoing efforts to kneecap democracy look somehow smaller, kind of an expanding of the authoritarian Overton window, as some of the political scientists say? Or is he just getting ready to try to see if he can break the whole thing and run for a third term, turn this country into a dictatorship? And you say, oh, wait a minute, that sounds extreme. It is extreme. But don't let them trick you into word games and rhetoric, or trying to shoot the messenger, or go after the media, which we've seen in many countries and we see right now in this one. Because what we're talking about is what Donald Trump says and does. We're not talking about, it doesn't even always matter how I describe it to you, as long as you can get the facts and evidence and make sure you're getting reliable information, which is what we do around here, what we practice. So forget the word dictator or the word authoritarian for a moment if you want to, and remember that Donald Trump did not leave office peacefully last time. That is the great stain on him, regardless of anything else you like or dislike about him. And we've reported before, there are things that he says and does that many people in the country like. That's fine. He won more votes in the last election. That's fine. But he also trafficked in, supported, and then pardoned people convicted of the crimes against the United States, attacking police, sedition, pardoning every last Jan 6 attacker.
The plan was simply this. We had over 100 congressmen and senators on Capitol Hill ready to implement the sweep.
Do you realize you are describing a coup?
No.
If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned.
J.D. Vance, welcome to your new life. Yesterday, Donald Trump commuted the sentences of and pardoned everyone, from the most violent criminals who participated in the insurrection to those convicted of lesser offenses.
There has been no greater embrace in the modern era of people who attacked police and tried to overthrow democracy than those pardons. Pardons so extreme that now they've happened and people got used to it. That's part of being alive. People can get used to a lot of things. But so extreme that J.D. Vance, then Vice President-elect, was saying in public, well, obviously, not all of the people who attacked. Yes, all of them. And that is the context for other things Donald Trump is doing that are not technically currently illegal. For example, the show of force in Washington is still within the legal limit of basically a month limit on that. I'm not going to get into all the details, so I'm not telling you it's technically illegal right now, although he's been testing it in California and there, and he may try to blow past that deadline. But the wider impact is a federal government using a show of force, pushing others to the side, using ICE raids not only to do immigration enforcement, which again is part of their work, but showing up at opposition party members' press conferences, sometimes getting involved in arresting them. Some of those cases dropped, others continue. The show of force is linked to the attacks on democracy. And now Republican governors say they want in. Remember, there's not a bunch of riots right now in the country. This is not historically a time where you'd have National Guard troops. And while the numbers you see are relatively small, we're showing you Republicans doing this again as kind of a little step, because who really wants to debate 135 personnel? The point is to get it started, just as Trump started in California and D.C., and now we're seeing Republican governors test this. If you don't think that this is a risk for being abused around election time, you haven't been paying attention. Meanwhile, the people being patrolled are concerned. From the nation's capital to California to Texas, this is what it looks like when the attacks on democracy get more physical into the streets, encroaching, while legislatures try to redraw the maps to prevent what? A free and fair midterm election that might dislodge one aspect of a Republican agenda right now, that from Trump to the anti-health care bill that came out of Washington to the ongoing secrecy over Epstein, an agenda that remains very unpopular around the nation.
It's all just stress testing, right? And it leaks out not just from this White House, but at the state level. So from the White House, you have sending in military troops into Los Angeles, waiting to see what courts say, because if the courts say that's allowed, they will continue to do that in other cities. You see them stripping funding from Washington, D.C., and then federalizing the police and seeing how long they can do it and running the possibility of extending the 30-day deadline. And then what do you see happening in Texas? Locking members of the legislature in a building or forcing them to sign permission slips. All of the authoritarian urges of this administration are leaking out. So whether it's legal or illegal, it is definitely against the spirit of democracy that everyone, except people in this White House, have lived with for our entire lives.
Molly?
I think also it's important to remember that intimidation plays a big part here. This is the District of Columbia. They feel they can do it because it's not a state technically, so it is legal. But I also think there really is, this is a city that is majority minority, 90% voted for Democrats, filled with media and a lot of Democratic politicians and a lot of judiciary. So these are groups that they really want to keep in line and intimidate. So I think that's a real thing, too. Also, I want to add these checkpoints that they have, where they use, it's technically legal to do checkpoints for sobriety and for car accidents, but checkpoints just because somebody is annoying you or someone doesn't look the way you want them to, that is very much out of the mainstream.
Right, and it's testing it and encroaching on it, as we've seen. Jason, the absence of bad news is not good news. But I have something that is less bad news, low bar. But we had the Democratic leader, Jeffries, on this program, and we asked him exactly about these issues. And he's doing what he can within the minority powers that he has. But he also made a point that's just a sad autocratic math. It's not good news. But here's what he said about what is in danger and what might still be protected in the coming midterms.
The good news is, to the extent that there's a silver lining in our electoral system, is that we don't have a national election system. It's state by state by state. And in many of the states where there will be competitive gubernatorial elections, and certainly in the overwhelming majority of the states where the House will be decided, there are Democratic governors, Democratic attorney generals, and Democratic secretaries of state.
I believe it will too, Ari. I just don't know how reliable it'll be. I think sometimes we have to step back from the sort of red state, blue state thing and recognize that there are large numbers of Republicans in blue states and large numbers of Democrats in red states. And so the issue is, will a fair election be allowed at the local level?
It is day 213 of the second Trump administration. And tonight, the Texas House approved new congressional maps that'll likely give Republicans 5 new seats in the midterm elections. The state Senate will take it up tomorrow, and Governor Greg Abbott could sign it as early as this Friday. It is a major win for President Donald Trump, who pushed Abbott to call the special session for this very reason. Texas Democrats returned to vote 2 weeks after they fled the state to protest the redistricting plan. Listen to what Vice Chair of the House Democratic Caucus said after it passed.
We knew as members of the minority party that we were not going to be able to kill this map indefinitely. But what we did know is that we had to get the story out. The battle isn't over. We have to take this to the courts, and I feel very confident that these maps will be found unconstitutional. These are the most racist, gerrymandered maps Texas has passed since the 1960s and the passage of the Voting Rights Act. This is a blatant power grab, and everybody should be paying attention. And really, the Republican Party of Texas should be ashamed of themselves.
Now, in response to Texas, California Governor Gavin Newsom is taking a page out of the Republican playbook and moving forward with a redistricting plan of his own. Democrats in the state have quickly pushed through legislation that would ask voters to amend the state constitution and allow them to set aside the current map if another state, like Texas, changes theirs. California's independent redistricting panel would resume drawing lines after the 2030 census. And now President Obama is weighing in and backing the approach, telling a fundraiser that while partisan gerrymandering is not his preference, quote, we cannot unilaterally allow one of the two major parties to rig the game. And California is one of the states that has the capacity to offset a large state like Texas. And with that, let's bring in our nightcap. Laura Barron Lopez, MSNBC White House correspondent, is here. Alan Smith, political reporter for NBC. Tim O'Brien, Bloomberg Opinion senior executive editor and Trump biographer. And Basil Smikle, Democratic strategist and former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party. He's now an MSNBC political analyst and Columbia University professor. So good to see all of you. Laura, let me start with you. President Trump pushed Texas to do this, as I mentioned, and he's reportedly looking at other states to do the exact same thing. Can you do me a favor? Explain how significant this is for President Trump, for the White House. How big of a victory are they declaring tonight?
Well, this is incredibly significant, and it's something that the president made very clear that he wanted. And Texas's Governor Greg Abbott and the Republicans in that state decided that they were going to deliver it for him. And this is all about the 2026 midterms, and that the president understands that come midterms, you typically can sometimes become somewhat of a lame duck. You may lose one of the chambers, be it the House or the Senate, in Congress. And this is an attempt to try to avoid that. So the White House is incredibly happy with this result right now. And they're, of course, going to be looking towards other states that could potentially do it, especially as they see Democrats responding and not taking this lying down, because of what it means for 2026. Democrats have been incredibly hopeful that they could flip, especially the House. House where the margins are so thin in Congress. And if that House were to flip to Democratic control come 2026, then President Trump would be faced with investigations. He would be faced with stalling to his agenda and would essentially be a lame duck president.
Basil, President Obama has weighed in, as I mentioned, saying that this is the right thing. It's a responsible thing for Democrats to do, to pursue a redistricting plan of their own. Gavin Newsom, actually notably had this big event the other day where the ICE agents showed up outside in Little Tokyo in downtown L.A. Is this politically the right option for them right now?
For Democrats, listen, Democrats didn't start this fight, but they need to end it. They need to be able to step up and fight fire with fire. That's what the grassroots wants to see. But the reality is this is one of the many tools that Democrats should have to be able to push back against Donald Trump. He is manipulating this from his perch at the White House. He's also talked about leading a campaign to end or amend mail-in votes. Mm-hmm. This is all about manipulation.
By the way, with Vladimir Putin encouraging them to do so.
Absolutely right. This is a manipulation of our electoral process, a manipulation of the votes, a stripping away of everything that the Voting Rights Act was intended to do. And better believe there is going to be substantial money behind this. So this is the right move for Democrats at the right time. They cannot take their foot off the gas.
Gavin Newsom has taken some big swings. Not only, Alan, is he out front on this redistricting fight, but he's doing some incredible and pretty entertaining trolling of Republicans on social media right now. What have you made of Newsom adopting this strategy, this approach?
Well, this has given him a great lane to get to the very forefront of the 2028 conversation. Yeah. California often is not at the center of our national political discourse. This is a rare opportunity for Gavin Newsom to kind of take center stage.
To my chagrin, by the way, as a native Californian.
Of course. And, Newsom has spent months trying to make overtures to the right, I would say, right? He's had Charlie Kirk on his podcast, Steve Bannon. He made those trips to South Carolina to very Republican areas. He had that debate, a year or two ago with Ron DeSantis on Fox News. Now he's taking, I would say, what he's learned in those experiences and trying to use, some of Trump's own strategies against Republicans.
Tim, can I read you a couple of these examples? Because we were all going through these earlier, and there's a lot of them. Last week, Newsom posted, people are saying they are the greatest maps ever created, even better than Christopher Columbus. Donald, the failure Trump be warned, tomorrow may be the worst day of your life, all because you missed the deadline, Liberation Day for America, ! And this one was last night. He said, Fox hates that I am America's most favorite governor, quote, ratings king, saving America while Trump can't even conquer the big stairs on Air Force One anymore, ! Trump has lost his step. Well, this kind of, what do you think about all this?
Thank you for your attention to this matter.
Yeah, thank you for your attention to this matter. Is this going to piss Donald Trump off?
It's going to irk Donald Trump. It's clearly irking the people around him. The problem with all of this is it is great short-term jousting, but it demeans and it debases our politics ultimately. I think it's funny. I'm glad to see the tables being turned on social, using social in the ways you need to do in trench warfare politically. And
so many of these Fox News personalities and other right-wing media personalities are I mean, who's the snowflake now? I mean, I think that's sort of what this Newsom thing, the tables have turned.
Right, but where ultimately does that get us beyond the fact that Gavin Newsom's on a velociraptor with the flag behind him, bare-chested? I think it's funny. I think it's funny to see them push right back and pick up some of that momentum. But when Trump was on with DeSantis on Fox, a year and a half ago or whenever that was, he had great debates. I was so impressed by his ability to go to the issues in front of a live audience and talk about politics and get down to the nitty-gritty on their network and take it to them. Ultimately, I think the Democrats should be in a place where it is about substance, but I don't begrudge them at all twisting the knife in some of these street fights.
And, I've seen it myself. I stood in that emergency operations center with Gavin Newsom at the height of the ICE raids and watched him with a mastery of the issues that I think I had never, and sort of an anger and a passion against Donald Trump that I had never seen before. And in this, he's really going to have to use those skills to convince the voters of California, ultimately, Basil, that this redistricting plan is something that they should actually come out and vote for, when famously Arnold Schwarzenegger got this nonpartisan redistricting plan in place. He's even come out against it. Arnold Schwarzenegger has, what Gavin Newsom wants to do. You think he'll be able to convince the voters of California that this is the right move at the right time?
I think so. Look, I mean, Eric Holder was on this path of having, more less partisan redistricting. So when he came out against it, said, look, I didn't like it, but I don't see any other path now. And for Obama to make those points, I think is huge. To be honest, I would like to see more Obama out there, because if anyone can make the case for Democrats as to why this, why now, it's going to be him, and not leave the individual governors out there to kind of fend for themselves in this regard. But that brings me to another point, which is, in the past, what we've seen are, for example, attorneys general coming together to push back against Trump legally. How are Democratic governors going to do that politically? That's what voters really want to see. So if it's Gavin Newsom now, is it going to be New York and other states, whether it's New Jersey, Massachusetts, whatever, coming together and saying, no, this is our united front? That, I think, is I don't want to say a turning point, but I think it's what would convince voters that this is bigger than just California.
What does that look like? What do these Democratic governors coming together look like beyond what they're doing in California?
Well, it's a couple of things. One, it's kind of adopting a similar strategy that conservatives have used in the past when they were concerned about backlash, meaning progress for people of color, for example. When the state of Virginia didn't want to integrate their schools, one of the districts closed all of the schools in the district for 5 years, right? That's hardcore. That is an extreme position to thwart progress. So in my view, what Democrats need to do is essentially adopt that same strategy. If you're going to go to that extreme, here are some extremes we need to go to. We've got to break some glass here. We've got to take it to the courts. We've got to engage in this redistricting if it comes to that. And frankly, one of the concerns that I have as a result of some of this is that the party might still start to lag behind in the voter registration, which we saw articles about.
Well, and the clock is against them.
And the clock is against them. But that's why they need to do this, because they need to see a fighter.
You mentioned taking it to the courts. Stephen Miller was an expert at this with his America First legal, during the Biden administration, particularly as it related to immigration issues. And Laura, I want to bring you back in here because, on that very point, the federal takeover of policing in Washington, D.C. Has been on the minds of so many people. And today, J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth and Stephen Miller himself went out to visit the National Guard troops at Union Station. Let's listen to a little bit of what Stephen Miller said, I believe, at a Shake Shack. Watch this.
There are homeless encampments that have made it impossible for families to use public parks. Residents of this city who are shot in street violence every single year. For too long, 99% of this city has been terrorized by 1% of the city. The voices that you hear out there, those crazy communists, they have no roots. They have no connections to the city. They have no families they're raising in this city. They have no one that they're sending to school in this city. They have no jobs in this city. They have no connections to this community at all.
Aside from the fact that the man there railing about, what he believes should happen to families is the man who was the architect of the family separation policy and deliberately ripped 5,500 children apart from their parents in what a Republican-appointed judge called one of the most shameful chapters in American history. In Washington, D.C., the Washington Post is saying 69% of residents in the district strongly disapprove, strongly of the federal takeover there. Laura, what Trump is doing is about more than his base in Washington, D.C. Does this translate across the country as well? You look at those men and women in uniform standing behind Stephen Miller. They look pained, in my estimation, to be there.
Yes, and also, Jacob, we saw that in recent months, the president's favorability on immigration wasn't necessarily as strong as it used to be. It has started to slip a bit when it comes to an issue that for so long has been the issue that he has dominated on, that he has really made at the core of his multiple campaigns. And so will this translate to other states and to his voters across the country? I'm a little bit skeptical about that, only because the president is also threatening, and Stephen Miller has as well, and J.D. Vance, the vice president, did today as well, that this could be something. They could use D.C. as a model to then expand into other cities, into other states. Now, they may refrain from expanding that into Republican-led states because those Republican governors may not like that. But the more that they attempt to expand this, and test the powers of the presidency, which is something that Stephen Miller has long said that he wanted to do. They're operating under this unitary theory of the executive. That's something that we could start to see even his base and people who previously supported him maybe back off on that.